Local history, local culture, local events, your community. This is the Joe Kelly Show.
And welcome to the show, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Brad Velardi is our guest. Brad is one of the main, how should I say, a driving force. Because he does it all with Greater Utica Magazine. He, and along with his family, Mr. Velardi. Was it his idea, your dad's idea, to start this magazine?
Yeah, well, actually, my father, my brother Nick, and myself, we kind of came up with the idea ourselves. My dad was the one with the background kind of on local history. He's lived in the area his whole life. He knows all the nostalgic points that people are interested in. And so he kind of pushed us in that direction. But all three of us together started it.
And what year was that, Brad?
That was back in 2014. December 2014 was the very first issue we printed.
Did it go well right from the beginning? No.
No. To put it simply, no, I would say. Anytime you go out there with an unknown product, it's difficult to sell, it's difficult to distribute, it's difficult to get people to pick it up and try something new. The fact that it was free and at the time was mailed to people's homes made it a little bit easier on us. But it did take quite a bit of time before it really caught on and people started actually looking for it when it was printed every month.
And the magazine is filled with local history. Really, I mean, there are some modern, but the backbone of the magazine is local history, is it not?
It is, yeah, and we're trying to move in a direction where we have a little bit more diversified content, but still predominantly history. It will always be predominantly local history because there's so much of it. As you know, you covered it for many years and did such a great job at that.
Thank you.
That there's so much you can't run out.
When you say you'd like to diversify a little bit,
well, the city is moving in a great direction, the Mohawk Valley in general, and we'd like to start covering that a little bit because, history is happening every single day, and we want to be there to cover all of the positive things that have gone on in the past and that are currently going on today.
Yeah. I've got the March issue in my hand. When does April come out?
April should be out by the 1st of April. That's usually the safest date to go by, with printing and things like that, especially when you have snow coming down the way it is still at this point of the year. You never know when there's going to be certain delays, but April 1st is a pretty safe bet that it should be out. We'll
talk a little bit about the March issue, but before we do that, was it the January issue that had the article about Dick Clark?
Yes.
January.
Yeah, January.
I liked that issue because I've always been a fan of Dick Clark because he got his start here in Utica. And there's a picture in there. It's a picture of Dick Clark, Lyle Bosley. There's somebody on the right side, who I forget his name. It's identified in your story.
Sure.
And then on the left side, you can barely see somebody, and I'm trying to think of Jack Durant, and who was I'm pretty sure that's a picture of Jack Durant, who was the news director over at WKTV.
Yeah.
And that's where Dick Clark got his TV start. He started on radio, right?
Yeah, sure. Yep. He started on the radio, eventually went to WKTV, and that was really an interesting story for me to do because my family has always had a New Year's Eve party at my parents' house from the time I was a young kid all the way up until today.
You're still a young kid.
Younger, I should say. And we used to see Dick Clark every single year. You know, he's a staple of New Year's Eve, as we mentioned in the story. And never in a million years, especially when you're a kid, would you think that the person you're seeing has any roots in Utica. When you come from a small town, you don't equate that to massively famous and successful people. So that was really cool. I don't recall exactly the age was when I found out about his work there, but when I did, and this year was the 50th anniversary of the first New Year's Rockin' Eve. So I thought it was a great time to cover that.
The picture of Dick Clark and Lyle Bosley and the other gentleman, I've seen that many times. but there's a picture of Dick Clark back in those days, standing next to a camera. I've never seen that picture before. That's a good picture.
Yeah, it's a great picture. We got it from the Oneida County History Center. Like, we get so many great pictures. We get them from Rome Historical Society, Clinton Historical Society. We have a lot of great partners in that regard. But yeah, it's an awesome picture. I mean, you could see clear as day that it's him. You know, it's in there. And they used to call him the oldest. What was
teenager?
it? The oldest teenager. Yeah.
And his. Did you go with it? I can't remember now what I read in your article. Did you go into the fact that his father was on the radio here?
Yes, and I believe that's how he got his start locally. Yes, I did get into that. I believe it was his father and his uncle, I think, that ran that particular radio station.
Okay. WRUN maybe it was?
Yeah, I believe that was it. So yes, we did get into that.
I think, talking about people who were on the radio and TV, and I think you had a story, did you not, on the late Hank Brown?
We haven't covered Hank Brown yet. Yeah. That's something that we're really interested in doing, and we are going to get to that eventually. We assume that he still has some family locally.
Oh yeah.
And
I was at his wake, and I'm trying to think when his wake was. Down in the valley. He's from the valley.
Yeah.
And his wife was there, and his granddaughter, Keegan, who works here. And so he does, to answer your question, he does have family.
Yeah, and we plan on reaching out and doing something on him soon.
And he had, I just think of him because, you mentioned Dick Clark and American Bandstand, and Hank Brown had Twistorama USA.
Right.
And so there was a lot of teenagers that came his way. You mentioned that you're looking to do a story down the line on him. Are there other stories you got in the back of your head? Boy, I'd like to do a story on that, or I'd like to do an article on that.
Well, I mentioned one time when I was here that we're going to be covering General Electric at some point.
Yeah.
There's certain stories like that I'm always a little hesitant because I want to make sure that it's done exactly right. Because, like I mentioned before, it meant so much to so many people that you don't want to leave any stones unturned. So we will get to that eventually. There's many other stories. Yeah. I mean, there's the things that I'm uncovering, my father and I are uncovering every single month, and that we're finding out. Just it inspires you to keep going. So there's stories, I'm sure, down the road that I haven't even thought of.
And here's the thing, too, about General Electric. There are so many people who used to work for General Electric that are still in the area. If you make a mistake, you'll hear about it.
Yeah, right.
Brad Velardi's our guest. We're talking about some of the articles in Greater Utica Magazine. Short break, right back. Thanks. And welcome back, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us. Brad Velardi's our guest. Brad is from the Velardi family that puts out Greater Utica Magazine. We're talking about the magazine in the March issue, and there's cover stories about Utica's Union Station. And you can't talk too much local history without mentioning Utica's Union Station.
Right, exactly. Now, this is another one that I was holding on tightly to, that I didn't really want to approach until I was absolutely ready to. But I felt like it was a great time for it. There's still a lot of exciting things going on down there. It's the Union Station's thriving, and people love it. It's a huge landmark, possibly the most famous landmark that we have. Yeah. And so, I figured the people would really enjoy reading.
In fact, Frank Prisvigian, I ran into him the other day and got talking, because when it comes to landmarks, he's one of the people to go to. And we got talking about some of the behind-the-scenes things that led to the saving of Union Station. And one of these days we're going to get Frank on the show to talk a little bit about that. He was in the front lines on the battle to save the station.
Yeah.
What did you do for your research on that? What kind of stuff did you go through to write that story?
Well, the History Center has quite a bit of information. I believe they even published a book about Union Station. Also, old newspaper articles are always great points of reference for us that we use. You know, anytime that you can get a sort of a, not necessarily a first-hand account, but an account of something that happened in that time. Facts tend to get a little convoluted over time, and people mix up information, and before you know it, you're printing something that is almost like the telephone game. It changes over time. But if you can get an article right from 1914, say, when it was completed, that's always the best approach to take.
I was always intrigued by, of course, young people wouldn't know this, but I was always intrigued by the way you used to get to the tracks. You used to go downstairs and through tunnels and then up to the tracks. Of course, they filled in those tunnels years ago.
Yeah, a lot has changed down there. And one of the things that they had to do, as you know, to construct the building that's there today, was they had to literally move the Mohawk River because it would consistently flood the tracks at the previous stations. So that was something that was probably, to me, the most fascinating thing to discover. And it took them, I think, 6 years to do that, and a boatload of money for them to complete that project. So there's a lot that goes on in that story that is really interesting. You mentioned the saving of Union Station. The Landmark Society of Greater Utica was formed to save Union Station. That was the purpose of the organization. Of course, we know them now. They own the Rucker Street mansions. And
You've done something on that, haven't you?
Yeah, we did one several years ago. We toured them. They do tours all throughout, I believe, the summer. I'm not sure exactly when they are, but they actually walk you through and show you what happened in each room and all that sort of thing. But it was amazing to discover that they were formed for that purpose, to save Union Station, all the great things they've done since then. You know?
The historic Rutger Park, I'm trying to think of it. Well, number 2, I think, that they lost. I think that was torn down. I think the roof didn't hold up and they tore that down. And then number 1 was Dowling's. That still stands.
Yeah. Well, anybody who lives in an old house knows that if you want to maintain any integrity, it's very expensive, very difficult. There's not a lot of contractors and people around that can do that kind of work properly. So it's an uphill battle. Anytime you're trying to save a historic structure, it's hard work, you know. And my hat goes off to the people out there that have been able to do that successfully, because it's not easy.
Yeah. Do you look into the seasons at all when you're trying to decide what to put in your next issue? Do you look to seasons for seasonal kinds of articles?
Yeah, sure. Particularly the sports stories are very seasonal. I guess maybe that's because I've been a sports fan my whole life, that I find it hard to make sense out of publishing say a football story in April or something along those lines. But we did a story on Trinkus Manor. We made sure we put that in the December issue a couple of years back. So to a certain degree, we do pay attention to seasonal stuff.
Now, in this issue, the March issue, you've got an article about the 1936 U.S. Olympic team.
Yeah.
I've seen articles in the past about hockey, including the Clinton Comets. Are you a hockey fan?
I'm a local hockey fan. I don't watch a lot of hockey on TV. I'm extremely fascinated with the local history that we have. And more so than the hockey itself is how much it means to the people. Because you just see that auditorium fill up for every single game. The Utica College games, the Comet games. You see the way that Clinton, the effect that hockey's had on Clinton. So it's more of maybe like a psychology study for me to see the way certain things affect people in this area. And almost nothing has affected people the way that hockey has.
There was an article, I think it was in this month's, in the March issue, on a gentleman that won a bronze medal in the Olympics.
Yeah, yeah. On that, the reason why we published that story is because Albert Prettyman, who was who introduced hockey to this area, he was the Hamilton College coach. He was actually the head coach of the 1936 U.S. Olympic hockey team. And there's an interesting anecdote that's associated with that story, and that's that the Olympics that year were held in Nazi Germany.
Right.
And so the United States team was the only team that during the opening ceremony would not give the Nazi salute to, he was Chancellor Hitler at the time. And so he was infuriated and stormed in the U.S. locker room. He confronted the players. That gentleman, Francis Baker, was the goalie who you're referencing. He went to Hamilton College. He took German at Hamilton, so he was able to translate everything that Hitler was shouting at the players and everything. And Hitler said that Germany will get its revenge when it plays the United States. And then Francis Baker famously told him that not only will the United States beat Germany in hockey, but we will always beat Germany in everything. And so that obviously came true roughly a decade later in World War II.
Now there's a local connection, and I didn't realize the local connection until I read the story in here, of the Grateful Dead in Utica.
Yeah, right.
What's the connection?
Well, they've performed at the Utica Memorial Auditorium multiple times, I believe on 3 different occasions. But this year I decided to cover it. I'm not a huge fan of the band itself, but I do know that this year is supposedly their farewell year and they won't be touring anymore. And again, this was another anniversary, a 50-year anniversary that the Grateful Dead first came to the Utica Memorial Auditorium. So I thought it would be a fun story. There's a lot of fans out there, and the fans who do love them are extremely dedicated to them.
What about Elvis? Did you do something about Elvis?
Yeah, we covered the fact that he was supposed to perform here. That was a few months ago. We did cover that. That's a very famous event. My grandmother had a ticket that obviously she never got to use. She was a huge Elvis fan.
Did she keep the ticket?
She did keep it, yeah. So that was always interesting to see that, and it was fun to learn about it and how people waited outside of the arena the night before for tickets, and you know, he caused madness everywhere that he went. So
when we come back, let's talk about is it Dr. Mary Walker?
Yeah, Mary Edwards Walker. Yeah.
Mary Edwards Walker, a surgeon, a doctor during the Civil War, won the Congressional Medal of Honor. We'll talk to Brad about that when we come back. Short break, right back. And welcome back, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us. Brad Velardi is our guest. Brad is with Greater Utica Magazine, and we've been talking about some of the articles in the March edition of the magazine, including, we should mention this one, Brad, Mary Edwards Walker. Who was she?
Well, she's the only woman in U.S. history to ever win the Congressional Medal of Honor. She was a surgeon that was actually originally not allowed to serve the soldiers, but eventually they did allow her to do that. She actually aided both Union and Confederate soldiers, and when she crossed the Confederate line, the Confederates actually held her in a prisoner. She became a prisoner of war, and she survived that and later tried to form her own practice in Rome. It didn't do well. People were not ready to have a female doctor at that time.
Was she with her, had she been married at that point?
Yeah, I believe she tried to start the practice with her husband. I believe is how it went. So she had a rough go at it, and then in 1916, the Medal of Honor was actually stripped from her because they felt as though she didn't meet the qualifications somehow. Unfortunately, she passed away in 1919 without the Medal of Honor. But then in 1977, I believe, President Jimmy Carter gave it back to her. So at least her legacy now is that she's still the only woman to win.
Yeah. And she was in Rome, right?
She was in Rome, yes. That's where the practice was attended.
And then did her residency in Rome get interrupted by the Civil War? Is that what happened?
I'm a little bit cloudy on that. It was not interrupted. She actually left Rome because the practice didn't do well.
Okay.
So they're not exactly related to each other. Yeah.
Okay. There is a monument on Genesee Street, right across the way from St. Francis and across the street from Fountain Elms, and you do an article on that.
Yes, the Copernic Memorial.
Yeah.
Nicholas Copernicus, as he's known in the United States. The Polish people have been very prominent in Utica for many years, and I don't believe, well, maybe other than the Pulaski Monument, there wasn't really much to show the effect that Polish people have had on the world or on the country. And so they decided to form a memorial fund and were able to erect this monument of Copernic, who was, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the first scientist or one of the first scientists to claim that the world, that the solar system did not revolve around the Earth, but around the sun.
In fact, I think that's what he's holding in his hand in the monument, right? He looks like he's holding the. I don't know, what would you say that is? He's holding.
You know, I'm not 100% sure, but I know that was a huge development at the time. It went completely against conventional thought, and so they felt as though that was the perfect representation of their heritage, and so the monument went up, and it's still there today.
There used to be a couple that used to, and I'm trying to think of their names. I shouldn't have even brought this up because I can't think of their names, but there used to be a couple. I used to see them out there tending the flowers and things at the memorial. And people go up there now in the summertime for those concerts that they have across their way.
Yeah, sure.
At St. Francis.
Yeah, there's still use being made of that area, and it's great to see that people get to witness that monument, and hopefully they know why it's there and the people who put it there.
And then your article, let's see, did you write this one about Taft and Sherman?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that tied in nicely to the local train station kind of theme that we were going with for the first half of the magazine last year. It was not Union Station because I believe that they came in 1908 or 1909 while they were campaigning, and they stopped in Utica. I love covering things like that because I think it's interesting that Utica was an important enough stop to come here along the campaign trail. I know Vice President Sherman was a native of Utica, so that's part of the reason why they stopped. But another story that we're publishing in the April issue is about how Harry Truman stopped here in 1948 as well.
Whistle stopped tour?
Yeah, yep, stopped briefly, started at Little Falls, made his way up to Utica, and then Rome. And so I think that's fascinating to know that people would stop here, you know.
The one that has always fascinated me, and I've written about it extensively, is Lincoln.
Yes.
President-elect Lincoln stopping here as he went around the country on his way to Washington, D.C.
Right. Yeah, that is fascinating.
Have you done anything on that?
We haven't done anything on that per se, but I do know about that, and I believe after he passed away, his body was on a locomotive that also passed through Utica.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Maybe the Lincoln stop on the way to Washington to be inaugurated could be a story for you. It's easy for me to give work to other people. Could be a story for you next President's Day.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah. Definitely open to that.
One of the things that Utica has done so well with, or has benefited from over the years, is that train station. If we were not on that New York Central line, a lot of these things would never have happened.
Right, absolutely. And it's always been a transportation hub, that area of Bag Square, from when people would travel on the Mohawk River all the way to the Erie Canal, eventually to the rail lines, and even today. People are still passing through there from various parts of New York State. So I think it's been a great thing. Thankfully, we saved it. Now they have the Adirondack Scenic Railroad. There's all kinds of stuff going on.
And you know, when you go around the country and you look at train stations in communities much bigger than ours, and take Syracuse, for example. They've got a little, I don't know what you'd call it, but it's not much of a train station.
Right, yeah, well, it's another reason why it's great to have Union Station is it's a testament to the lengths that the city would go to make something so beautiful back during that time. And it's a piece of history that reminds everyone of, you know, our history, that we were a major contributor to the nation.
And I think, you know, you mentioned location, and that's why we've got all these distribution centers in our area. I mean, we've got the location, you know, and it's a great location.
Absolutely.
All right, well, I'll let you get going because you're working on the April issue. And what's going to be in the April issue?
The April issue on the cover is going to be John E. Creedon, who the Police Benevolent Association is named after. My father's working on that story. We have a story on Ted Kroll, the former PGA pro who was from New Hartford. Several other stories. We have a lot of good content coming.
Yeah. What's your deadline for every month? When do you have to get done?
Oh, well, I guess technically it's whenever we can get everything finished, but it's usually 7 or 8 days before the end of the month. There's a 7-day turnaround on the magazine, typically, if the world's all aligned perfectly and we get it, and then it's off to distribution time.
You know, again, I'm giving somebody work, but you mentioned John Creedon, and the Utica police officer killed in the line of duty. I came across his grave the other day over at St. Agnes Cemetery.
Yeah.
And there's a couple markers over there from the PBA, and you know, if you didn't know. No, we were aware, and you know, my dad's working on that one, but I've read a first draft of it, and very dramatic story. Great. It's filled with so much detail, and people are really gonna enjoy reading that one for sure. Good. Well, thanks for coming in as
Thank
always.
you.
I know how busy you are.
Yeah, thanks.
And come back soon, okay?
Yeah, no problem.
All right, good. Well, that's going to do it for us this week. We'll be back next week, do it all again. Don't forget cnyhomepage.com. There's lots of good stuff on there as well. Until next time, do you have a website?
Yes, gumagazine.com.
Okay. And until next time, take care of yourself, everybody.